The silver moonlight cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Miles City, Montana. As Sophia Valenti clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to shield herself from the biting autumn wind of 1883. The journey from Boston to this frontier town had drained her last reserves of strength and hope, but she had no choice but to forge ahead. Her father's death had left her with nothing but debts, and a letter from an old friend offering her work in this distant western outpost. The main street was quiet as dusk settled over the town. Most businesses had already closed for the day, their windows dark against the approaching night. Sophia's stomach growled painfully, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the meager breakfast provided on the stagecoach. The last of her money had gone to pay for her transportation, leaving her with empty pockets and an uncertain future. A warm glow from Mercer's General Store caught her attention. The establishment was still open, light spilling from its windows onto the wooden sidewalk. Sophia hesitated, knowing she had no money, but the thought of finding her father's friend would have to wait until morning. Tonight, she needed information and possibly a small act of charity to see her through until dawn. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and the warmth of the store enveloped her immediately. The scents of coffee, leather, and various spices mingled in the air. Behind the counter stood a portly man with thinning hair and suspicious eyes. Several other customers browsed the shelves, a young mother with a child, an elderly man examining tools, and a tall figure in the back corner whose face was obscured by the shadow of his hat. "Good evening," Sophia said, approaching the counter with what confidence she could muster. "I've just arrived in town and was hoping you might direct me to the boarding house run by Mrs. Eleanor Wilson." Terence Mercer, the store owner, looked her up and down with undisguised scrutiny. "New in town, eh? Eleanor's place is 3 blocks down. Take a right at the blacksmith's. Though she's particular about who she takes in." "Thank you," Sophia replied, turning to leave before her hunger drove her to desperation. "Wait," Mercer called, his voice suddenly sharp. "Empty your pockets." Sophia turned back, confusion etching her features. "I beg your pardon, you heard me." His voice had risen, drawing the attention of the other customers. "I saw you slip something into your pocket. Empty them now, or I'll call the sheriff." Heat rushed to Sophia's face as embarrassment and indignation battled within her. "Sir, I have taken nothing from your establishment. I merely asked for directions, a likely story." Mercer came around the counter, his face reddening with anger. "I've dealt with your kind before, coming in here, acting all proper while your fingers do the stealing. I assure you, sir, I am not a thief." Sophia's voice trembled despite her efforts to remain composed. She turned her pockets inside out, revealing nothing but a handkerchief and her father's pocket watched the last memento of her former life. "What about your bag?" Mercer demanded, gesturing to the small valise she carried. Before Sophia could respond, the tall figure from the back of the store stepped forward. The light revealed a man in his early 30s with piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. His attire, from the worn leather chaps to the dusty boots and the revolver holstered at his hip, marked him unmistakably as a cowboy. "That's enough, Mercer," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "The lady hasn't taken anything." "Stay out of this, Jackson," Mercer snapped. "I know what I saw." "You now," the cowboy Jackson moved to stand beside Sophia, "because I've been watching this lady since she walked in and all she did was ask you for directions." The store owner faltered slightly but held his ground. "Well, something went missing right when she came in. My new silver letter opener was right here on the counter." "Are you certain you didn't misplace it?" Sophia asked, her voice steadier now with an ally beside her. "I know my own store," Mercer insisted. Check her bag or I'm getting Sheriff Dawson." Before Sophia could protest further, the cowboy reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins. "How much for the letter opener?" Mercer blinked in surprise. $2. "Here's 4, the cowboy said, placing the coins on the counter with a decisive clink. "That covers the item and the lady's inconvenience. Now, I suggest you apologize to the young woman." "I don't need to apologize for protecting my property," Mercer grumbled, but his bluster had disappeared as he eyed the money. "The lady's name has been cleared," Jackson said firmly. "You've been compensated double for an item you probably misplaced. I'd say that concludes our business." The other customers had stopped pretending not to watch, their gazes moving between Mercer, the cowboy, and Sophia like spectators at a tennis match. "Fine," Mercer finally said, scooping up the coins. "No harm done, I suppose." "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Jackson," Sophia said quietly as they moved toward the door. "But I cannot accept such generosity from a stranger. I owe you $4 that I cannot repay at present." "Lucas," he corrected. "Lucas Jackson, and you don't owe me anything, miss." "Valenti. Sophia Valenti." She straightened her shoulders, regaining some of her composure. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly. "Miss Valenti, consider it an investment in the town's hospitality. Miles City hasn't made the best first impression." They stepped outside into the crisp evening air, leaving Mercer's general store and its palpable tension behind them. "You mentioned Eleanor Wilson's boarding house," Lucas said, falling into step beside her. "Allow me to escort you there." "It's not safe for a lady to walk alone after dark, especially in an unfamiliar town." Sophia hesitated. In Boston, accepting such an offer would have been improper, but the rules of society seemed different here on the frontier. And after what had just happened, the thought of a friendly escort was reassuring. "That would be most appreciated, Mr. Jackson." "Lucas," he corrected again with a hint of a smile. "Formalities don't last long in Miles City." As they walked down the dusty street, Sophia stole glances at her unexpected champion. In the moonlight, his features were more clearly defined, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, straight nose, and those remarkably blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around them with careful attention. "Have you come far, Miss Valenti?" he asked, breaking the silence. "From Boston," she replied. "And please call me Sophia. It seems only fair if I'm to call you Lucas." "Boston." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's quite a journey, family business." Sophia's steps faltered slightly. "No family left to speak of. My father passed away last month. I've come to stay with an old friend of his, at least until I can establish myself." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Miles City isn't Boston, but it has its charms. The people are generally good folk, despite your unfortunate introduction to Mercer." "You seem familiar with his character," Sophia observed. "Let's just say he's not known for giving folks the benefit of the doubt." Lucas's mouth tightened into a line. "Especially newcomers." They turned at the blacksmith shop as Mercer had instructed. The street was quieter here, with fewer oil lamps illuminating the way. "May I ask what brings a Boston lady to Montana territory?" Lucas inquired after a moment. Sophia considered how much to reveal. "Necessity," she finally said. "My father's investments failed before his death. Our home and possessions were sold to satisfy his creditors. An old friend of his wrote that she could offer me employment here." "Teaching," Lucas guessed. Sophia smiled for the first time since arriving in Miles City. "Yes, how did you know?" "You have the bearing of an educated woman. Teachers are always needed out here." He gestured ahead to a 2-story house with a neat front yard and a sign reading Wilson's boarding house hanging near the door. "And we've arrived." The boarding house was a well-maintained structure with warm light glowing from several windows. Compared to some of the rougher buildings they had passed, it appeared almost genteel. "Thank you for your escort, Lucas," Sophia said, stopping at the gate, "and for your intervention at the store. I'm not accustomed to being accused of theft." "No decent person should be," he replied, his expression serious. "Mercer won't bother you again. Word travels fast in Miles City, and by morning, everyone will know he was in the wrong." Sophia nodded gratefully. "Nevertheless, I intend to repay your $4 once I've secured employment." Lucas tipped his hat again, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "If it eases your conscience, Miss Sophia. Though I suspect you'll find other ways to improve this town beyond settling such a small debt." Before she could respond, the door of the boarding house opened, revealing a stout woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. "Are you planning to stand out there all night?" the woman called, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet street. "It's getting cold, and I don't heat the outdoors." Sophia turned to thank Lucas once more, but he was already moving away, raising a hand in farewell. "Welcome to Miles City, Miss Valenti. I suspect we'll meet again." "You must be Sophia," Eleanor Wilson said as Sophia approached the porch. "Sarah Thompson wrote to say you might be arriving this week. Come in, child. You look half frozen and completely exhausted." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." Sophia climbed the steps, glancing back once to see Lucas's tall figure disappearing around the corner. "I see you've already met Lucas Jackson," Mrs. Wilson remarked with a knowing look as she ushered Sophia inside. "Interesting man, that one. Owns one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, though you'd never know it to look at him." Sophia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "He's a rancher. I assumed he was a cowhand." "Lucas Jackson is many things, but rarely what he first appears to be," Mrs. Wilson said cryptically. "Now come along. You need food and rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to learn about the characters of Miles City." The boarding house interior was clean and modestly furnished, with a parlor to the right and a dining room to the left. Delicious aromas wafted from what Sophia presumed was the kitchen at the back of the house. "I'm afraid I have very little money," Sophia admitted as she followed Mrs. Wilson. "I was hoping to secure employment before Sarah explained your situation," Mrs. Wilson interrupted. "Your room and board are arranged until you receive your first month's wages. The school board has already approved your appointment, pending your arrival." Relief washed over Sophia. "I cannot express my gratitude enough." "Save your thanks for after you've met your students, Mrs. Wilson said with a dry chuckle. Some of them could try the patience of a saint. Over a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, Mrs. Wilson filled Sophia in on the basic geography and social landscape of Miles City. Founded less than a decade earlier, the town had grown rapidly with the arrival of the Northern Pacific Railroad and the establishment of Fort Keogh nearby. "The school is on the north end of town," Mrs. Wilson explained. "It's a one-room affair with about 30 children of various ages. The previous teacher, Miss Holcomb, left rather suddenly to marry a banker from Helena." Sophia nodded, trying to absorb all the information despite her exhaustion. "And when am I expected to begin?" "Monday morning, which gives you tomorrow and the weekend to settle in and prepare." Mrs. Wilson studied her thoughtfully. "You'll need proper attire. That Boston finery won't serve you well here." Looking down at her travel-worn but still fashionable dress, Sophia sighed. "I have little else, I'm afraid." "We'll see what can be done," Mrs. Wilson said decisively. "Sarah mentioned you're handy with a needle. That's a useful skill out here." Later, in the simple but comfortable room assigned to her, Sophia sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself a moment of uncertainty. The journey, the confrontation at the store, the kindness of a stranger. It all swirled in her mind as exhaustion claimed her. As she drifted toward sleep, her last thoughts were of piercing blue eyes and the quiet authority of the man who had stepped forward to defend her honor. Lucas Jackson. A name she suspected she would not soon forget. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the lace curtains of Sophia's room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't recall where she was. The simple furnishings and the distant sound of horses' hooves on packed dirt were far removed from her Boston bedroom. Reality returned quickly as she rose and washed with the water provided in the porcelain basin. Changing into her least wrinkled dress, she made her way downstairs, where several other boarders were already gathered around the dining table. "Ah, our new schoolmistress has joined us," Mrs. Wilson announced, emerging from the kitchen with a platter of flapjacks. "Everyone, this is Miss Sophia Valenti, recently arrived from Boston." The boarders, two middle-aged men who introduced themselves as Mr. Peterson from the bank and Mr. Collins, the telegraph operator, and an elderly widow named Mrs. Finch, greeted her warmly. Sophia was relieved to find that news of last night's incident at Mercer's store hadn't yet reached them. "Miss Valenti will begin teaching at our school on Monday," Mrs. Wilson continued as she served breakfast. "I expect you all to help her become acquainted with our town." "It would be my pleasure to show you around today, Miss Valenti," Mr. Peterson offered with what Sophia recognized as more than neighborly interest. "Thank you, but Mrs. Wilson has already offered to accompany me," Sophia replied smoothly, catching her landlady's approving glance. After breakfast, Mrs. Wilson led Sophia through town, pointing out essential landmarks. Miles City in daylight was a far more bustling place than it had appeared the previous evening. Cowboys, merchants, soldiers from the nearby fort, and ladies in practical frontier attire moved purposefully along the boardwalks. Wagons and riders navigated the wide main street, raising dust that glinted in the morning sunlight. "The school is just ahead," Mrs. Wilson said as they walked. "It's not much to look at, but it's sturdy enough." The schoolhouse was indeed simple, a one-room wooden building with a small bell tower atop the roof. Several long benches faced a teacher's desk at the front, with a blackboard mounted on the wall behind it. A pot-bellied stove stood in the corner, currently cold in the mild autumn weather. "The school board provides basic supplies," Mrs. Wilson explained as they inspected the interior. "Chalk, slates for the younger children, a few textbooks to share. Many bring their own books from home if they have them." Sophia ran her fingers along the teacher's desk, her heart quickening with anticipation. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, teaching had always been her passion. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "I can't wait to meet the children." "That enthusiasm may wane after a few days with the Miller twins," Mrs. Wilson chuckled, "but your dedication does you credit." They continued their tour of the town, stopping at various establishments where Mrs. Wilson introduced Sophia to the proprietors. At the dressmaker's shop, Mrs. Wilson insisted on ordering 2 practical day dresses and a warmer shawl for Sophia. "Consider it an advance on your salary," she said when Sophia protested. "A teacher must look respectable, and those Eastern frills won't survive a Montana winter." Their final stop was the town hall, where Sophia would meet with Mayor Donovan and the school board chairman. As they approached the building, a familiar figure descended the steps. Lucas Jackson, dressed much as he had been the night before, though his clothes appeared fresher. "Mrs. Wilson, Miss Valenti," he greeted them, touching the brim of his hat. "I trust you're settling in well. Mr. Jackson has been inquiring about your welfare this morning," Mrs. Wilson informed Sophia with a knowing glance between them. Sophia felt a flush rising to her cheeks. "I am indeed settling in. thanks to Mrs. Wilson's generosity and your timely intervention last night. I was just speaking with the mayor about that very matter, Lucas said, his expression turning serious. Mercer has a habit of jumping to conclusions that has caused problems before. The mayor assures me he'll have a word with him. That's very kind, but not necessary, Sophia insisted. I would prefer not to begin my time here by creating difficulties. The difficulty was Mercer's making, not yours, Lucas replied firmly. In any case, it's resolved now. The mayor is expecting you, he added with a nod toward the town hall doors. Yes, we shouldn't keep him waiting, Mrs. Wilson agreed. Good day, Mr. Jackson. Actually, Lucas said, looking directly at Sophia, I was hoping Miss Valenti might allow me to show her the countryside tomorrow afternoon. The view from Lookout Point gives a proper perspective of the territory she'll be calling home. Sophia hesitated, aware of Mrs. Wilson's interested observation. In Boston, accepting such an invitation without a proper chaperone would have been scandalous. But she was no longer in Boston, and the social rules here were clearly different. That's very kind of you, she said carefully. Perhaps Mrs. Wilson has far too much housework to be gallivanting about the countryside, the older woman interjected with a smile. Mr. Jackson is one of our most respected citizens, Sophia. You'll be perfectly safe in his company. Then I would be delighted, Sophia said, meeting Lucas's steady gaze. Thank you for the invitation. I'll collect you at 2 o'clock, he replied, a smile warming his features. The afternoon light on the valley is something to behold. With another tip of his hat, Lucas continued on his way, leaving Sophia feeling strangely flustered. Well, well, Mrs. Wilson murmured as they climbed the town hall steps. Lucas Jackson doesn't extend such invitations lightly. You've made quite an impression, my dear. I'm sure he's merely being kind to a newcomer, Sophia protested, though the flutter in her stomach suggested she hoped otherwise. Lucas Jackson is many things, but merely anything isn't one of them, Mrs. Wilson replied with a knowing smile. Now, let's introduce you to the mayor and get your teaching contract formalized. The meeting with Mayor Donovan and Mr. Whitman, the school board chairman, went smoothly. Both men were clearly relieved to have found a qualified teacher so quickly after Miss Holcomb's departure. The salary was modest, but included the room and board at Mrs. Wilson's, which Sophia found more than fair. The children are a diverse lot, Mr. Whitman explained as he handed Sophia the class roster. Ages 6 to 16, with varying levels of previous education. Some of the ranch children attend only sporadically during planting and harvest seasons. I understand, Sophia assured him. I've taught mixed classes before, though on a smaller scale. We'll have a community gathering on Sunday after church, Mayor Donovan added. Give the parents a chance to meet you before classes begin on Monday. By the time they left the town hall, it was past noon. Sophia felt a new sense of purpose that helped ease the lingering homesickness. She had employment, lodging, and already the beginnings of a social circle. Perhaps Miles City could indeed become home. As they walked back toward the boarding house, they passed Mercer's General Store. The proprietor was outside, arranging a display of tools. When he spotted Sophia, his face darkened, but he gave a stiff nod of acknowledgement before turning away. It seems Mr. Mercer has been spoken to, Mrs. Wilson observed quietly. I hope there won't be lasting animosity, Sophia said. I'll need to shop for supplies eventually. There are other stores, Mrs. Wilson replied dismissively, but Terence Mercer's pride is his weakness. Once he realizes you're to be the new teacher, he'll change his tune. He has 2 children of school age. The remainder of the day passed in preparations for Sophia's new role. Mrs. Wilson provided several well-worn but serviceable books from her personal library, to supplement the school's meager collection. Sophia spent hours reviewing the materials and planning lessons for her diverse group of students. That night, as she lay in bed, Sophia found her thoughts drifting not to her upcoming teaching responsibilities, but to her planned outing with Lucas Jackson the following day. There was something compelling about the rancher that went beyond his handsome features or his timely rescue. A steadiness, a quiet confidence that drew her curiosity. It had been a long time since Sophia had allowed herself to think of any man in such terms. Her father's illness had consumed the last 2 years of her life in Boston, and before that, her teaching duties had left little time for courtship. The few suitors who had shown interest had been quickly discouraged by her father's financial difficulties. Now, in this new place where no one knew of her family's fall from prosperity, where her worth seemed to be measured by her abilities rather than her social standing, Sophia felt a freedom she hadn't experienced before. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Sophia finally drifted into sleep, dreaming of vast open plains and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through to her soul. Saturday dawned bright and clear, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching winter. Sophia spent the morning helping Mrs. Wilson with household chores and continuing her preparations for Monday's classes. By noon, however, her concentration began to falter as her thoughts repeatedly turned to the afternoon's outing. "You might as well go get ready, Mrs. Wilson finally said with an amused sigh. "You've read the same page 3 times now." Sophia blushed. "Am I that transparent? Only to someone who's lived as long as I have," the older woman replied kindly. "It's natural to be excited about exploring your new surroundings." "Yes, of course." "The surroundings," Sophia murmured, earning another knowing look from her landlady. In her room, Sophia changed into her best remaining dress, a deep blue wool that complemented her eyes, and arranged her dark hair in a simple but elegant style. The practical side of her insisted this attention to her appearance was merely respect for the occasion, but honesty forced her to acknowledge a desire to make a favorable impression on her escort. At precisely 2 o'clock, the sound of hoofbeats announced Lucas's arrival. Sophia watched from her window as he dismounted from a magnificent chestnut stallion and secured a second horse, a gentle-looking mare, to the hitching post. "Your escort has arrived," Mrs. Wilson called up the stairs, "and he's brought Daisy for you to ride." "That's a good sign. She's his most trustworthy mount." Sophia descended the stairs, hoping her nervousness wasn't evident. Lucas stood in the parlor, hat in hand, looking somehow both at ease and slightly anxious. "Miss Valenti," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Jackson," she replied formally, aware of Mrs. Wilson's presence. "And thank you for arranging this excursion." "The pleasure is mine," he assured her. "I've brought Daisy for you. She's gentle and sure-footed on the trails." "It's been some time since I've ridden," Sophia admitted. "We had few opportunities in the city." "Daisy will take good care of you," Lucas promised, "and I'll be right beside you the entire time." This assurance, delivered with such quiet confidence, eased Sophia's concerns. After bidding farewell to Mrs. Wilson, who reminded them to return before dusk, for propriety's sake, they stepped out into the autumn sunshine. "Have you ridden astride before?" Lucas asked as he helped her adjust the stirrups on Daisy's saddle. Sophia shook her head. "Only side saddle, and not since I was 16. Side saddles are rare out here," Lucas explained. "Not practical for the terrain, but the principle is the same: balance and rhythm with the horse." With surprising strength and grace, he helped Sophia mount, his hand steady at her waist as she settled into the saddle. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she busied herself with arranging her skirts to hide her reaction. Lucas mounted his own horse with practiced ease, and they set off at a walk through the streets of Miles City. Several townspeople called greetings to Lucas, their curious gazes lingering on Sophia. "Word travels fast," Lucas commented as they passed the last buildings and entered the open country. "By now, everyone knows the new schoolteacher is riding out with me." "Will that cause gossip?" Sophia asked, concerned. Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Of course it will. That's half the entertainment in a small town. But it's the respectful kind of gossip, if that makes sense." As they rode, Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the region. The Yellowstone River Valley spread out before them, a patchwork of golden grasses, scattered groves of cottonwood trees, and distant blue mountains. Cattle grazed in the lower meadows, while hawks circled overhead in the clear sky. "Your ranch is nearby?" Sophia asked as they followed a well-worn trail that gradually climbed a ridge. "About 5 miles west," Lucas replied, gesturing toward the distant foothills. 3,000 acres, most of it good grazing land. My father claimed it 20 years ago when this was still wild country. "You grew up here then, born and raised," he confirmed. "Though I spent a few years back east for schooling." This surprised Sophia. "You attended university?" "Harvard," he said with a hint of self-consciousness. "My father insisted, said a man should know books as well as he knows cattle if he wants to build something lasting." "A wise man," Sophia remarked, seeing Lucas in a new light. "Is he still living?" "No," Lucas replied, his expression sobering. "He and my mother both died in a flash flood 5 years ago. The river rose faster than anyone expected." "I'm so sorry," Sophia said softly, understanding all too well the pain of losing parents. "It was hard," Lucas acknowledged. "But they built something worth continuing. The Jackson brand is respected throughout the territory." They had been gradually climbing as they talked, and now Lucas led them around a bend in the trail that opened onto a stunning vista. The entire valley lay spread before them, with Miles City, a collection of tiny buildings in the distance, and the Yellowstone River, a silver ribbon winding through the landscape. "Lookout Point," Lucas announced, reining his horse to a stop. "Best view in the county." Sophia caught her breath at the magnificence of the scene. After dismounting and helping Sophia down from Daisy, Lucas spread a blanket on a flat rock and produced a small picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a flask of cool cider. "This is spectacular," Sophia said as they settled on the blanket. "Thank you for bringing me here. I thought you should see what Montana has to offer beyond Mercer's accusations," Lucas replied with a wry smile. The mention of the incident brought a flush to Sophia's cheeks. "About that, I still intend to repay you for the letter opener." "I found it this morning," Lucas said casually, handing her a piece of cheese. "You found the letter opener?" Sophia asked, confused. It had fallen behind Mercer's counter. "Apparently it slipped off when he was serving a customer earlier in the day." Lucas's eyes held a glint of satisfaction. "I made sure he knew, and that he'd be setting the record straight with anyone he'd told about the incident." Sophia stared at him. "You went back to the store to look for it?" "I had a feeling Mercer had jumped to conclusions," Lucas explained. "He has a habit of blaming newcomers for any mishap. When I stopped by this morning to buy supplies, I suggested we take a thorough look around. The letter opener was right where I suspected it might be." "That was very considerate of you," Sophia said, touched by his efforts on her behalf. "I believe in justice, Miss Valenti," Lucas replied simply. "And I didn't want your reputation tarnished before you'd even properly arrived." They ate in companionable silence for a while, admiring the view and the play of light across the distant mountains. Sophia found herself studying Lucas, when he wasn't looking the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his serious demeanor indicated, the capable hands that handled the reins with such confidence. "Tell me about Boston," Lucas said eventually. "What made you leave everything familiar to come to a place so different?" Sophia considered how much to share, then decided on honesty. "As I mentioned, my father died recently. What I didn't say was that he died virtually penniless, after years of what appeared to be successful investments. It turned out many of his business ventures had failed, and he had borrowed extensively to maintain our lifestyle." "I'm sorry," Lucas said, genuine sympathy in his eyes. "When he passed, the creditors descended immediately. Our home, our possessions, everything had to be sold. I had been teaching at a small ladies' academy, but without references or connections." She trailed off, the pain of those desperate weeks still fresh. "So you came west," Lucas finished for her. "Sarah Thompson, who now runs the school in Fort Benton, was my father's goddaughter. She wrote that the position here might be opening soon and she could recommend me if I could make the journey." Sophia smiled faintly. It seemed like Providence. "Fort Benton is nearly 200 miles from here," Lucas remarked. "How did you end up assigned to Miles City instead?" "When I arrived in Helena, I learned that the Miles City position had just become available, and it was more urgent. Sarah arranged for the reassignment." Sophia glanced at Lucas. "It seems fortune favored me, despite the initial reception at Mercer's store." "Fortune favors the brave," Lucas said quietly. "And it took considerable courage to travel so far alone, especially after such losses." The simple understanding in his words touched Sophia deeply. For months, she had maintained a brave face through her father's illness, his death, the humiliation of their financial ruin, and the exhausting journey west. Lucas's acknowledgment of her courage, something she herself had scarcely recognized, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Forgive me," she said, hastily wiping them away. "It's been a trying time." Instead of empty reassurances, Lucas simply offered his handkerchief. "Sometimes the strongest people are those who feel everything deeply, but keep going anyway." Their eyes met, and Sophia felt a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance, as if Lucas truly saw her, not just the composed schoolteacher or the respectable daughter, but the woman beneath who had endured and survived. The moment was broken by the distant rumble of thunder. Looking up, they saw dark clouds gathering over the western mountains. "We should head back," Lucas said, rising and offering Sophia his hand. "Montana storms can move in quickly." They packed up the remains of their picnic and mounted their horses. The return journey was more hurried than their leisurely ride out, but Sophia found she had gained confidence on Daisy and could maintain a comfortable trot beside Lucas. The storm was moving faster than anticipated, however, and they were still a mile from town when the first fat raindrops began to fall. "There's a lined shack just ahead," Lucas called over the rising wind. "We can wait out the worst of it there." Sophia nodded, raindrops already soaking through her dress and hair. Within minutes, they reached a small, sturdy cabin set back among a grove of cottonwoods. Lucas quickly dismounted and led both horses under a lean-to beside the cabin before helping Sophia down. "The ranches maintain these shelters for the cowhands during roundup," he explained as he opened the door. "Basic, but dry." The interior was indeed simple, a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Lucas immediately set about lighting the stove while Sophia stood dripping on the threshold. "You're soaked through," Lucas observed with concern. "There should be some dry clothes in that trunk. They won't fit well, but they're clean." Sophia hesitated, propriety warring with practicality. I couldn't possibly. A crash of thunder directly overhead decided the matter. Lucas turned his back discreetly. I'll see to the horses while you change. There should be coffee and some beans we can heat up if you're hungry. Once alone, Sophia quickly exchanged her sodden dress for the oversized flannel shirt and denim trousers she found in the trunk. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, cinching the waist with a piece of rope. The masculine attire felt strange but wonderfully warm and dry. She hung her dress near the stove and used a rough towel to dry her hair as best she could. When Lucas returned a few minutes later, equally soaked, he stopped short at the sight of her in the cowhand's clothing. For a moment, Sophia feared he found her appearance improper or ridiculous, but the appreciation in his eyes suggested otherwise. It seems the schoolteacher cleans up well as a cowgirl, he said with a smile. Those clothes suit you better than they ever did Jim Rollins. I feel rather scandalous, Sophia admitted, tugging self-consciously at the shirt. Necessity trumps convention out here, Lucas replied practically. Now, if you'll afford me the same privacy. Sophia nodded and turned to face the wall while Lucas changed into dry clothes from his saddlebag. She busied herself with examining the cabin's sparse contents, a few books stacked on a shelf, some playing cards on the table, basic cooking utensils hanging from hooks. All clear, Lucas announced after a few minutes. He moved to the stove and began preparing coffee. The storm's settling in for a while from the look of it. Might as well make ourselves comfortable. Rain drummed steadily on the roof as they sat at the small table, warming their hands around tin cups of strong coffee. Lucas had found some jerky and hardtack to supplement the coffee, a far cry from their earlier picnic, but welcome nonetheless. Mrs. Wilson will be concerned, Sophia said, glancing at the window where darkness was falling prematurely due to the heavy clouds. She knows I wouldn't risk riding in a storm like this, Lucas assured her. And she's lived here long enough to understand these weather patterns. We'll head back as soon as it's safe. The casual we and the domestic scene sharing a simple meal in the warm cabin, while rain fell outside, created an unexpected intimacy that Sophia found both alarming and oddly comforting. Tell me about your students in Boston, Lucas said, perhaps sensing her discomfort and changing the subject. Were they very different from what you expect here? Grateful for the diversion, Sophia described the young ladies she had taught at Madame Rousseau's academy, mostly daughters of Boston's merchants and professionals, being prepared for advantageous marriages rather than independent lives. Most had little interest in actual learning, she admitted. They wanted accomplishments, enough French to order in restaurants, enough mathematics to manage household accounts, enough history to converse at dinner parties. And what did you want to teach them? Lucas asked perceptively. To think for themselves, to question, to understand the world beyond their drawing rooms. Sophia smiled ruefully. Madame Rousseau didn't entirely approve of my methods, but she kept me on because the girls' test scores improved. I suspect the children here will benefit from your approach, Lucas said. Life on the frontier requires independent thinking. What about you? Sophia asked. You mentioned Harvard. What did you study there? Law initially, Lucas replied, surprising her again. My father thought it would be useful for managing the ranch's contracts and land deals, but I found myself drawn to literature and history. A cowboy with a passion for books, Sophia mused. You're full of contradictions, Mr. Jackson. The best people usually are, he responded with a slight smile. Wouldn't you agree? Miss Valenti, Boston lady turned frontier schoolmarm. Their conversation flowed easily as the hours passed, and the storm continued unabated. Lucas shared stories of growing up on the ranch, his first cattle drive at 12, the mentorship of an old Crow scout who taught him tracking and survival skills, his mother's insistence on maintaining certain civilized customs despite their remote location. Sophia found herself reciprocating with tales of her own childhood summers at her grandfather's country estate, her early fascination with books and learning, her mother's gentle guidance before her untimely death when Sophia was 16. "So your father raised you alone after that?" Lucas asked. "Yes, though he was often consumed with business," Sophia replied. "We had a housekeeper who managed the practical matters, but father insisted I receive the best education possible. He believed women's minds were just as capable as men's, which was rather progressive for his time." "He sounds like a man worth knowing," Lucas observed. "He was," Sophia said softly. "Despite his financial failures at the end, he was a good man who tried his best. I miss him terribly." The simple admission, spoken in the intimate confines of the cabin with rain creating a cocoon of sound around them, released something in Sophia. To her mortification, tears welled up and spilled over before she could prevent them. Lucas said nothing, but his hand covered hers on the table, a gesture of comfort that asked nothing and offered everything. For a long moment they sat in silence, connected by touch and shared understanding of loss. Eventually, Sophia regained her composure. "I apologize for the display. It seems Montana is determined to make me reveal more emotion in 2 days than I allowed myself in Boston for 2 years. Perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing," Lucas suggested gently, withdrawing his hand but maintaining his gaze. "There's a freedom here that the East doesn't always permit." Outside, the storm began to abate, the thunder now distant and the rain softening to a gentle patter. The approaching evening cast long shadows through the cabin's single window. "We should be able to return soon," Lucas said, rising to check the weather. "The worst has passed." Sophia felt an unexpected reluctance to leave the shelter of the cabin and the easy companionship they had established. In Boston, being alone with a man like this would have irrevocably damaged her reputation. Here, she suspected it would be viewed as an unfortunate necessity of frontier life, perhaps raising eyebrows but not causing lasting scandal. "I should change back into my dress," she said, standing. "Though I'm afraid it's still quite damp." Lucas checked the garment hanging by the stove. "It's better than it was, but still too wet for comfort. Why don't you keep those clothes for the ride back? You can return them another time." Once more, practicality won out over propriety. By the time they mounted their horses and began the journey back to Miles City, dusk was settling over the landscape. The storm had cleared the air, leaving everything fresh and clean, with the scent of wet earth rising around them. They rode in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sophia found herself reflecting on the unexpected turns her life had taken, how the disaster of her father's financial ruin had led her to this place, this moment, riding beside a man who defied all her expectations of what a Western rancher would be. The lights of Miles City appeared in the distance, glowing warmly against the darkening sky. As they approached the town, Lucas cleared his throat. "I hope today's adventure hasn't soured you on Montana," he said, a note of concern in his voice. "It's not always so dramatic." Sophia smiled. "On the contrary, I found it rather exhilarating. Boston weather is much more predictable and considerably less interesting." "Then perhaps you'd allow me to show you more of the territory?" Lucas asked, a careful neutrality in his tone that didn't quite mask his interest. "There's a harvest festival next weekend at the Cartwright farm. Dancing, food, community gathering. It would be a good way for you to meet more of your students' families." "I would like that very much," Sophia replied, warmed by the invitation and the prospect of seeing him again. They reached Mrs. Wilson's boarding house to find the landlady standing anxiously on the porch. Her expression of worry transformed to relief, then surprise, and finally knowing amusement as she took in Sophia's attire and their rain-dampened appearance. "Thank heavens you're both safe," she exclaimed, coming down the steps. "When that storm blew in, I feared the worst. We took shelter in the line shack by Cottonwood Creek," Lucas explained as he helped Sophia dismount. "I apologize for any concern we caused. Better safe than sorry, Mrs. Wilson replied practically. "And I see you found some dry clothes, Sophia." "Borrowed temporarily," Sophia said, feeling her cheeks warm under the older woman's gaze. "My dress was soaked through." "Very sensible," Mrs. Wilson approved with a nod. "Now come inside, both of you. I've kept supper warm, and you look like you could use a hot meal." Lucas hesitated. "I should be getting back to the ranch. My foreman will be wondering what happened to me." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wilson insisted. "It's nearly dark, and the trails will be muddy and treacherous. You'll eat and stay in our spare room tonight. The ranch will survive until morning." Sophia was surprised by the invitation but realized it was the practical solution. The alternative would be for Lucas to ride several miles in near darkness through terrain made dangerous by the storm. "Please stay," she found herself saying. "Mrs. Wilson is right, it would be foolish to risk the journey tonight." Something in her expression must have convinced him, for Lucas nodded. "Thank you both for your hospitality. I'll just see to the horses first." Over a hearty supper of beef stew and fresh bread, Mrs. Wilson regaled them with stories of previous Montana storms she had weathered, including one memorable blizzard that had kept the entire town snowbound for a week. The other boarders had retired early, leaving the three of them alone in the dining room. "You'll need to prepare for winter, Sophia," Mrs. Wilson advised. "It comes early and stays late in these parts." "I'll help ensure Miss Valenti has the proper provisions," Lucas offered. "The general store should have heavy boots and a good coat in her size." Sophia's expression must have revealed her discomfort at the mention of the general store, for Lucas quickly added, "Or we could order from the catalog at Jenkins Mercantile instead." "I suppose I'll need to face Mr. Mercer eventually," Sophia said with a sigh. "Especially if two of his children will be my students. Terence Mercer will be the soul of politeness next time you enter his store," Mrs. Wilson predicted confidently. Lucas's discovery of that letter opener behind the counter has made him look quite the fool. After supper, Sophia excused herself to change into a nightdress and robe that Mrs. Wilson had lent her. When she returned to the parlor, she found Lucas examining the books on the landlady's shelves. "Mrs. Wilson has gone to prepare your room," Sophia explained as she entered. "She mentioned it hasn't been used in some time and needed fresh linens." Lucas turned, a copy of Thoreau's Walden in his hands. "One of my favorites," he said, holding up the book. "Have you read it?" "Yes, several times," Sophia replied, settling into an armchair near the fireplace where a small blaze took the chill from the air. "I find his philosophy compelling, though perhaps easier to practice in the Massachusetts woods than in Boston society." "Or on a cattle ranch," Lucas agreed with a smile, taking the seat opposite her. "Though there are similarities, the self-reliance, the connection to nature, the simpler way of living." "Is that why you returned here after Harvard?" Sophia asked. "The appeal of a simpler life?" Lucas considered the question. "Partly, but it was more about purpose. In Boston, I would have been just another lawyer or businessman. Here, what I do matters in a tangible way. The ranch employs 20 families. We provide beef for communities throughout the territory. There's a substance to it that I didn't find in my Eastern studies." "I understand," Sophia said softly. Teaching has always given me that sense of purpose. Even when the young ladies at Madame Rousseau's were more interested in their dance cards than their lessons, occasionally I'd see a moment when real learning took hold. Those moments made everything worthwhile. You'll find many such moments here, Lucas assured her. These children hunger for knowledge in a way Eastern students often don't. They understand its value intuitively. They continued talking as the fire burned lower, discovering shared tastes in literature and music, similar views on education and progress, and a common belief in the dignity of hard work. Despite their different backgrounds, Sophia was struck by how much they had in common and how easily conversation flowed between them. When Mrs. Wilson returned to announce the guest room was ready, Sophia was surprised to realize 2 hours had passed. She rose reluctantly, aware that tomorrow would bring church services and her introduction to the community. "Thank you for today," she said to Lucas as they prepared to part for the night. "Despite the storm, I enjoyed our excursion immensely." "As did I," he replied, his blue eyes warm in the firelight. "I'll see you at church tomorrow. Yes, Mrs. Wilson has kindly offered to introduce me to Reverend Simmons and the congregation. Until tomorrow, then." Lucas took her hand, and in a gesture more suited to Boston drawing rooms than frontier parlors, bowed slightly over it. "Sleep well, Miss Valenti." The touch of his lips, feather light against her knuckles, sent a warmth through Sophia that had nothing to do with the fire. "Good night, Mr. Jackson." Later, lying in her bed listening to the occasional drip of rainwater from the eaves, Sophia found herself replaying the day's events. The magnificent vista from Lookout Point, the intimate conversations in the line shack, the comfort of Lucas's presence during the storm all had combined to create a sense of connection she had rarely experienced. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Too soon after her arrival, too soon after the upheaval of her life, too soon to be thinking of Lucas Jackson as anything other than a kind neighbor who had come to her aid. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, it was his face she saw, those serious blue eyes that brightened when he smiled, that quiet voice that spoke of books and purpose and understanding. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's storm had never happened. The only evidence was the muddy streets and the fresh, clean scent in the air as Sophia walked to church beside Mrs. Wilson. Lucas had departed early to change clothes at his ranch, promising to meet them at the service. The white clapboard church sat on a small rise at the edge of town, its steeple reaching toward the blue sky. As they approached, Sophia saw dozens of townspeople making their way inside, families with children in their Sunday best, elderly couples walking arm in arm, young men with slicked back hair and awkward postures that suggested the unfamiliarity of formal attire. "Most everyone attends, Mrs. Wilson explained. "Even those who aren't particularly religious. It's as much a social gathering as a spiritual one." Inside, the church was simple but well-maintained, with polished wooden pews and colorful lights streaming through stained glass windows. Mrs. Wilson led Sophia to a seat near the front, nodding and smiling to acquaintances along the way. "Eleanor, is this our new school teacher?" A plump woman with kind eyes stopped them in the aisle. "Indeed it is," Mrs. Wilson confirmed. "Sophia, this is Martha Cartwright. Her husband owns the largest farm in the area, and they have 3 children who will be in your class." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Cartwright," Sophia said, extending her hand. "The pleasure is mine, dear," Martha replied warmly. "We've been praying for a good teacher since Miss Holcomb left. My Emma is particularly excited. She loves her books more than anything." Before Sophia could respond, A murmur ran through the congregation as Lucas entered the church. He was transformed from the casual rancher of yesterday, dressed in a well-tailored dark suit, his hair neatly combed, his bearing somehow both confident and humble as he nodded to those he passed. Martha Cartwright followed Sophia's gaze and smiled knowingly. "Lucas Jackson is quite a catch, isn't he? Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he never seems to notice." "Mr. Jackson was kind enough to show me some of the countryside yesterday," Sophia said neutrally, though she couldn't help feeling a small thrill when Lucas spotted her and made his way in their direction. "Morning, ladies," he greeted them, tipping his hat before taking a seat in the pew behind them. Before more could be said, Reverend Simmons appeared at the pulpit and the service began. The sermon focused on community and welcoming strangers, which Sophia suspected might have been chosen specifically because of her arrival. The Reverend was an energetic speaker who mixed scripture with practical advice and the occasional humorous anecdote that had the congregation chuckling appreciatively. After the service, Reverend Simmons made a point of introducing Sophia to the assembled townspeople, officially announcing her as the new schoolteacher and inviting everyone to greet her at the reception in the church hall. What followed was a blur of names and faces, as it seemed every resident of Miles City and the surrounding area came forward to welcome her. Parents introduced their children, merchants offered discounts on school supplies, and elderly residents reminisced about teachers from their own youth. Through it all, Sophia maintained her composure and friendly demeanor, though she doubted she would remember half the names she had heard. Lucas remained nearby, occasionally stepping in to make introductions or rescue her from particularly lengthy conversations. "Mrs. Mercer, Miss Valenti," Lucas said, guiding a nervous-looking woman and two children towards Sophia during a brief lull. "Sophia, this is Helena Mercer and her children, Timothy and Elizabeth." Sophia recognized the surname immediately but showed no sign of discomfort. "How lovely to meet you," she said warmly. "And these must be two of my new students." "Yes, miss," Timothy, a boy of about 10, replied politely while his younger sister half hid behind her mother's skirts. "I want to apologize for my husband's behavior," Helena Mercer said in a low voice. "Terence can be hasty in his judgments. He's not a bad man, truly. Please think nothing of it," Sophia assured her. "It was a misunderstanding that's been resolved. I look forward to teaching Timothy and Elizabeth." Relief washed over the woman's face. "Thank you for your understanding. The children are very excited about school starting tomorrow." After the Mercers moved on, Lucas leaned closer to Sophia. "That was gracious of you. They shouldn't suffer for their father's mistake," Sophia replied simply. "And holding grudges is exhausting work." Lucas's expression softened. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Valenti." "In good ways, I hope," she responded with a smile. "The very best," he confirmed, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. The gathering continued with a community meal in the church hall, tables laden with dishes brought by various families. Sophia found herself seated between Mrs. Wilson and Mayor Donovan, with Lucas directly across from her. "We're fortunate to have you, Miss Valenti," the mayor said as they ate. "When Miss Holcomb eloped so suddenly, we feared the school might remain closed for months." "I'm the fortunate one," Sophia replied sincerely. "Everyone has been so welcoming." Her gaze flickered briefly to Lucas, who was engaged in conversation with a rancher to his left, but seemed aware of her attention. "Almost everyone," Mrs. Wilson amended with a significant look toward the door, where Terence Mercer had just entered. Unlike his wife and children, who had arrived for the church service, the store owner had apparently only now decided to make an appearance. A momentary hush fell over the gathering as Mercer surveyed the room, his gaze eventually landing on Sophia. After a visible hesitation, he made his way toward their table. "Miss Valenti," he said stiffly when he reached them, "I believe I owe you an apology. The letter opener was found behind the counter. I jumped to conclusions." Sophia could feel the attention of everyone nearby, including Lucas, whose conversation had abruptly ceased. She offered Mercer a gracious smile. "Apology accepted, Mr. Mercer. I understand how such misunderstandings can occur." Something like relief flickered across the store owner's features, though his posture remained rigid. "My store carries school supplies, should you need anything for your classes. At a discount, of course." "That's very kind," Sophia replied. "I may stop by tomorrow after school." Mercer nodded awkwardly and moved away to join his wife and children at another table. The conversations around them gradually resumed. "Well handled," Mayor Donovan murmured approvingly. "That's the most humble I've ever seen Terrence Mercer." "Public opinion is a powerful force in a small community," Mrs. Wilson observed, "especially when certain facts become widely known." She shot a meaningful glance at Lucas, who merely raised his coffee cup in a subtle salute. As the afternoon progressed, Sophia found herself drawn into plans for the upcoming harvest festival at the Cartwright farm. Martha Cartwright insisted she would need a proper dress for dancing and volunteered her eldest daughter to help with alterations. "Lucas mentioned he'd invited you," Martha said with barely concealed interest. "He rarely attends social functions unless they involve ranch business." "I'm looking forward to experiencing more community traditions," Sophia replied diplomatically, aware of the speculation her connection to Lucas was generating. By the time they left the church hall, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Sophia felt a mixture of exhaustion from the constant socializing and excitement about beginning her teaching duties the next day. "May I walk you ladies home?" Lucas offered as they stepped outside. "That would be lovely," Mrs. Wilson accepted before Sophia could respond. These old bones appreciate a strong arm to lean on. The walk back to the boarding house was pleasant, with Lucas and Mrs. Wilson sharing amusing observations about various townspeople Sophia had met. It struck Sophia how comfortable it felt, this easy camaraderie, the golden afternoon light, the sense of belonging that was already beginning to take root despite her brief time in Miles City. At the boarding house gate, Mrs. Wilson tactfully excused herself to check on dinner, leaving Sophia and Lucas alone for a moment. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked, his expression showing genuine interest. "I believe so," Sophia replied. "Nervous, of course, but eager to meet my students properly and begin teaching." "You'll be wonderful," Lucas said with such conviction that Sophia couldn't help but believe him. "The children are lucky to have you." "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, your timely intervention at the store, yesterday's adventure, your support today. You've made my arrival in Miles City far easier than it might have been." "It's been my pleasure," Lucas assured her. "And I meant what I said about the Harvest Festival. I'd be honored if you'd accompany me." "I would like that very much," Sophia replied, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Until then," Lucas said, taking her hand as he had the night before. This time, his lips lingered a fraction longer against her knuckles, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Good luck tomorrow, Sophia." As she watched him walk away, Sophia knew with sudden clarity that Miles City, Montana, was indeed going to be her home, and that Lucas Jackson might well be the reason why. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness that had Sophia awake before dawn. She dressed carefully in one of the new, practical dresses. Mrs. Wilson had insisted on ordering a deep green wool that was both professional and flattering. Her dark hair was arranged in a simple but neat style, and she packed the few books and supplies she had managed to gather into a leather satchel borrowed from Mrs. Wilson. Breakfast was a hurried affair, with the other boarders offering encouragement and Mrs. Wilson pressing a packed lunch upon her. By the time Sophia set out for the schoolhouse, the sun was just beginning to illuminate the eastern sky. The streets of Miles City were already active with early risers shopkeepers opening their businesses, ranch hands riding through on their way to work, women hanging laundry in the crisp morning air. Several people called greetings to Miss Valenti, their friendly acknowledgement further evidence of how quickly news traveled in the small community. When Sophia arrived at the schoolhouse, she was surprised to find she wasn't the first one there. A girl of about 14 sat on the steps, a book open on her lap and an eager expression on her freckled face. "Good morning," Sophia greeted her. "You're certainly an early riser." The girl jumped to her feet, nearly dropping her book in her haste. "Good morning, Miss Valenti. I'm Emma Cartwright. I wanted to be here when you arrived to help you get settled." "That's very thoughtful, Emma," Sophia said, immediately warming to the enthusiastic girl. "I would appreciate the assistance." Together they entered the schoolhouse. Emma proved to be a wealth of information, pointing out where supplies were kept, explaining the previous teacher's methods, and identifying which benches were traditionally occupied by which age groups. "Miss Holcomb had us arranged by age, youngest to oldest," Emma explained. "But some of the little ones couldn't see the blackboard properly. Perhaps we should rearrange by height instead," Sophia suggested. With the shorter children in the front regardless of age, Emma's face brightened. "That would be much better. Timothy Mercer is 8 but tall as a fence post, and he blocks everyone's view when he sits up front." By the time other students began arriving, Sophia and Emma had rearranged the benches, cleaned the blackboard, and prepared slates and pencils for the day's lessons. Sophia greeted each child at the door, making note of names and ages to match with the class roster she had memorized. The diversity was greater than she had expected, not just in age, which ranged from 6 to 16 as she had been told, but in background and experience. The Cartwright children were clearly well educated already, while some of the ranch children admitted they had attended only sporadically in the past year. 2 children from the nearby fort spoke with distinct Irish accents, and a quiet boy named Thomas introduced himself as Half Crow, his dark eyes watching Sophia carefully as if gauging her reaction. By 9 o'clock, 28 students had arrived and taken their seats. Sophia moved to the front of the room, surveying the expectant faces before her. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and confident despite her inner butterflies. "I am Miss Valenti, and I am honored to be your new teacher. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to learn a bit more about each of you and what you hope to gain from your education this year." It was a departure from the traditional first-day recitation of rules and expectations, but Sophia believed in establishing a connection with her students before diving into academics. One by one, the children introduced themselves more fully, sharing not just names but interests, family backgrounds, and educational aspirations. Emma Cartwright wanted to attend college someday, like my Aunt Sarah in Fort Benton. Timothy Mercer was fascinated by maps and geography. 6-year-old Lucy Palmer proudly announced she already knew her letters all the way to Q. Thomas Two Feathers revealed a gift for mathematics, that had gone largely unchallenged by previous teachers. By the time they had completed the introductions, a sense of community had begun to form in the classroom. Sophia moved smoothly into an assessment of their current knowledge, using questions and simple exercises to determine where each child stood in reading, writing, and arithmetic. The morning passed quickly, and when noon arrived, Sophia dismissed the children for their lunch break. Most ran outside to eat from the lunch pails they had brought, though a few of the older girls stayed behind to ask questions about Boston and Sophia's previous teaching experience. As Sophia unpacked her own lunch on the teacher's desk, she glanced out the window to see Lucas Jackson dismounting from his horse across the street. Her heart quickened as he looked toward the schoolhouse and caught her gaze. With a small wave of acknowledgement, he tied his horse to the hitching post and crossed to speak with some of the children playing in the yard. Sophia couldn't hear what was said, but the children's laughter and eager responses suggested Lucas was a popular figure among them. After a few minutes of conversation, during which he occasionally glanced toward the schoolhouse windows, Lucas tipped his hat to the children and continued on his way down the street. The brief sighting left Sophia with a curious mixture of disappointment and pleasure. She had hoped he might stop in, yet the fact that he had ridden past the school at all suggested he had wanted to see how her first day was progressing. The afternoon session focused on establishing a curriculum that would challenge each student at their appropriate level. Sophia divided the children into groups based on ability rather than age, a practice that initially caused some confusion, but was soon accepted, as the older children who struggled with reading found themselves grouped with younger students who could help them, while advanced students like Emma and Thomas were given more challenging material regardless of their age. By the time the final bell rang at 4 o'clock, Sophia felt a deep satisfaction with the day's progress. The children filed out with smiles and waves, many already referring to her as our teacher with proprietary pride. As she was gathering her materials to return to the boarding house, a knock at the door drew her attention. Looking up, she was surprised to see Lucas standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, stepping into the classroom. "I wanted to see how your first day went." "It went wonderfully," Sophia replied, unable to keep the enthusiasm from her voice. "The children are bright and eager to learn, even those who have had sporadic education in the past." "I thought they might be in good hands," Lucas said, a smile warming his features. "I spoke with a few during their lunch break. Young Thomas Two Feathers was particularly impressed with your mathematics questions." "Thomas has remarkable aptitude," Sophia agreed. "With the proper guidance, he could go far." "His father works at my ranch," Lucas explained. "Good man. Married a Crow woman during the peace negotiations years back. Thomas gets his mathematical ability from him. Sam can calculate cattle weights and feed requirements faster than anyone I've met." "That explains it," Sophia said, pleased to have this insight into her student's background. "I'll be sure to provide Thomas with extra challenges." Lucas nodded approvingly, then seemed to remember something. "Actually, I had another purpose in stopping by. This is for you." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small paper-wrapped package. "What is this?" Sophia asked, accepting it with curious hands. "Open it and see," Lucas suggested, a hint of anticipation in his expression. Unwrapping the paper revealed a small brass bell, its surface polished to a warm gleam. "A school bell," Sophia murmured, running her finger over the smooth metal. "I noticed the one on your desk is cracked," Lucas explained. "This was my mother's. She taught at a small school near our ranch before she married my father. I thought you might be able to use it." The simple gift and the personal history behind it touched Sophia deeply. "Lucas, this is too precious to give away. It's a family heirloom, which is why I'd rather see it in use than sitting on a shelf gathering dust," he countered gently. "My mother would have approved of you having it. She believed strongly in education, especially for frontier children who might otherwise miss out." "Then I accept with gratitude," Sophia said, meeting his gaze, "and I promise to use it with the respect it deserves." "I have no doubt of that," Lucas replied, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment before he glanced around the classroom. "You've already rearranged things, I see." "The previous setup wasn't practical for all students," Sophia explained, grateful for the shift to a less emotional topic. "And I believe in adjusting methods to fit the needs of the children, rather than forcing them to adapt to rigid systems. A philosophy that would serve many adults well too," Lucas observed. "May I walk you back to Mrs. Wilson's? It's getting late." The offer was welcome, as Sophia had more materials to carry home than she had brought that morning: books loaned by students' parents, papers to review, and a jar of wildflowers presented by young Lucy Palmer to make the teacher's room pretty. As they walked through town, Lucas carried the heavier items while Sophia held the jar of flowers and her new bell. Several townspeople nodded or waved as they passed, their expressions suggesting that the sight of Lucas Jackson escorting the new schoolteacher was already becoming an accepted part of Miles City's landscape. "Word of your teaching methods is already spreading," Lucas commented as they walked. "Mrs. Cartwright stopped by the bank while I was there and couldn't say enough about how Emma came home bubbling with excitement over being challenged with real learning for a change." "I'm glad to hear it," Sophia replied, "though I hope I haven't inadvertently criticized Miss Holcomb's methods." "From what I gather, Miss Holcomb was more interested in maintaining order than inspiring minds," Lucas said diplomatically. "She did her job adequately, but without particular passion." "Teaching without passion is merely recitation," Sophia mused. "The children deserve better." "And now they have it," Lucas said simply. At the boarding house gate, Lucas handed over the books and papers but lingered before saying goodbye. "I'll be busy at the ranch for the next few days autumn roundup preparations, but I haven't forgotten about the Harvest Festival on Saturday." "Neither have I," Sophia assured him. "Mrs. Cartwright has already insisted on helping me prepare a suitable dress for dancing." A pleased expression crossed Lucas's features. "Then I'll call for you at 4 o'clock on Saturday." The festivities begin at sunset, but the Cartwrights always appreciate help with final arrangements. "I'll be ready," Sophia promised. As he had before, Lucas took her hand in farewell, his lips brushing lightly against her knuckles. The simple gesture had become something of a ritual between them, one that Sophia found herself anticipating with a fluttering in her stomach that had no place in a proper Boston lady's emotional vocabulary. "Until Saturday," Lucas said softly, his blue eyes holding hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary before he released her hand and departed. Sophia watched him go, the brass bell clutched in her free hand, and a sense of anticipation warming her from within despite the crisp autumn air. In less than a week, Miles City had transformed from an unknown destination to a place of promise and possibility, and Lucas Jackson had become far more than just the stranger who had defended her honor. Inside, Mrs. Wilson took one look at Sophia's expression and the bell in her hand and smiled knowingly. "I see Lucas Jackson has begun courting in earnest." "Courting," Sophia repeated, startled by the direct assessment. "He merely gave me a school bell to replace the cracked one." "His mother's bell, Mrs. Wilson corrected, having apparently recognized the item. "Margaret Jackson treasured that bell. It was one of the few possessions she brought west when she married Robert Jackson. Lucas giving it to you speaks volumes, my dear." Sophia felt herself blush. You're reading too much into a practical gift. Am I? Mrs. Wilson raised an eyebrow. Lucas Jackson has lived in this community his entire life, except for those years at Harvard. He's never shown particular interest in any of the eligible young women who have set their caps for him. Yet within days of your arrival, he's escorting you on rides, walking you home from school and giving you family heirlooms. Put that way, it did seem significant. But Sophia was reluctant to acknowledge the possibility, having learned from bitter experience in Boston that expectations often led to disappointment. "We've barely known each other a week," she protested weakly. "Time measures differently out here," Mrs. Wilson replied sagely. "Life on the frontier doesn't allow for the drawn-out courtships of Eastern society. When people know their own minds, they tend to act on it." That night, as Sophia prepared lessons for the next day, her thoughts kept returning to Lucas, his kindness, his intelligence, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. The brass bell sat on her bedside table, its presence a tangible reminder of the connection growing between them. It was too soon to name what she was feeling, she told herself firmly. Too soon to build hopes on a foundation of just a few days' acquaintance. And yet, as she finally set aside her work and prepared for bed, Sophia couldn't deny the anticipation she felt at the thought of Saturday's Harvest Festival and the prospect of dancing in Lucas Jackson's arms. The rest of the week passed in a blur of teaching, planning, and gradually settling into the rhythms of life in Miles City. Each day brought new discoveries about her students and the community. Sophia found herself adapting her teaching methods to the practical needs of frontier children, incorporating more hands-on learning and real-world applications than she had in her Boston classroom. True to his word, Lucas was absent from town, busy with ranch preparations for the changing season. Sophia told herself the disappointment she felt at not seeing him was merely the natural result of missing a new friend. But Mrs. Wilson's knowing glances whenever Sophia looked hopefully toward the door suggested the landlady thought otherwise. On Friday afternoon, as promised, Martha Cartwright and her eldest daughter arrived at the boarding house with fabric, pins, and measuring tape to help Sophia prepare for the Harvest Festival. "This cornflower blue will complement your eyes beautifully," Martha declared as she held the material against Sophia's face. "And the style is perfect for dancing full enough to move freely, but not so elaborate as to be impractical." As they worked, Martha shared stories of previous harvest festivals, the traditions, the foods, the inevitable romantic entanglements that seemed to blossom during the celebration. "Last year, Jim Peterson proposed to Mary Sullivan right in the middle of the Virginia reel," she recounted with a chuckle. "Nearly caused a collision when the other dancers didn't realize they'd stopped moving." "How romantic," Sophia murmured, trying not to wince as a pin came dangerously close to her ribs. "Speaking of romance," Martha continued casually, "the whole town's talking about you and Lucas Jackson." Sophia stiffened, causing another near miss with a pin. "There's nothing to talk about. Mr. Jackson has been kind in helping me adjust to Miles City, that's all." "If you say so, dear," Martha replied, her tone making it clear she didn't believe a word of it. But when Lucas Jackson rides 15 miles into town during roundup preparations, just to check on a new schoolteacher's first day, people notice. By Saturday morning, the dress was finished, a beautiful creation that managed to be both modest enough for a schoolteacher and flattering enough to make Sophia's heart beat faster when she tried it on. The blue fabric complemented her dark hair and fair complexion, while the cut emphasized her slender waist and graceful shoulders. "Lucas Jackson won't know what hit him," Mrs. Wilson declared when Sophia modeled the completed dress after breakfast. "That is not my intention," Sophia protested, though she couldn't help being pleased with her reflection in the mirror. "Perhaps not consciously," Mrs. Wilson replied with a wink, "but I've lived long enough to recognize when a woman wants to impress a particular gentleman." The day passed slowly as Sophia helped with chores around the boarding house, reviewed her students' progress from the first week, and tried not to watch the clock too obviously. By 3:30, she could no longer pretend concentration on anything else and went upstairs to prepare for the evening. A bath had been drawn in the small room reserved for that purpose, scented with lavender oil that Mrs. Wilson had provided for special occasions. After washing her hair and bathing, Sophia dressed carefully in the new blue gown. She arranged her dark hair in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face and a blue ribbon woven through the knot at the back. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman reflected there wasn't the proper Boston schoolmistress, or the grief-stricken daughter who had boarded a westbound train a month earlier. This woman had color in her cheeks, a sparkle in her eyes, and an anticipation in her expression that spoke of hope and possibilities. At precisely 4 o'clock, the sound of hoofbeats outside announced Lucas's arrival. Sophia took a deep breath, smoothed her skirts one last time, and descended the stairs with as much composure as she could muster. The sight that greeted her in the parlor stole that composure immediately. Lucas stood by the fireplace, engaged in conversation with Mrs. Wilson. He was dressed in what Sophia assumed was his finest, a well-tailored dark suit similar to what he had worn to church, but with a deep blue waistcoat that coincidentally complemented her dress perfectly. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and when he turned at her entrance, the admiration that blazed in his eyes made her breath catch. "Sophia," he said softly, the single word carrying volumes of appreciation, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, equally quietly. "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Wilson glanced between them with undisguised satisfaction. "Well, don't you two make a picture, the handsomest couple at the festival, I'd wager." Neither of them corrected her use of the word couple, Sophia noticed with a flutter of her pulse. "I've brought the buggy," Lucas said, recovering his composure. "The trail to the Cartwright farm can be rough on horseback for a lady in her finery." Outside, a smart black buggy waited, hitched to a matched pair of gray horses that stood patiently in the late afternoon sunlight. Lucas handed Sophia up into the seat with a gentle but firm grip, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. As they drove through town, several people called greetings or waved, their expressions ranging from approving to openly curious. Sophia realized they did indeed make a striking pair, and their appearance together at the Harvest Festival would only fuel the town's speculation about their relationship. "I should warn you," Lucas said as they left the town behind and headed into the countryside, "attending the festival with me will likely generate gossip." "So I've gathered from Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Cartwright," Sophia replied with a small smile. "They seem convinced we're in the midst of a whirlwind courtship." Lucas glanced at her, his expression serious despite the lightness of her tone. Would that be so terrible? The directness of the question caught Sophia off guard. We've known each other barely a week," she managed. "And in that week, I've thought more about you than I have about any woman I've ever met," Lucas said quietly, his eyes returning to the road ahead. "I realize it's soon too soon by Eastern standards, perhaps, but out here, life moves at a different pace." Sophia's heart raced at his candor. "Lucas, you don't need to respond now," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know my intentions are honorable and my interest is sincere. The rest can unfold as it will." The simple declaration, delivered without pressure or expectation, touched Sophia deeply. In Boston, courtships followed rigid protocols, formal calls, chaperoned outings, parental approvals. Yet here was Lucas, stating his interest plainly and then giving her space to determine her own feelings. "Thank you for your honesty," she said softly. "I admit I've thought of you as well, more than might be proper for such a brief acquaintance. But I'm still finding my footing here, still establishing myself as a teacher. And I would never want to interfere with that," Lucas assured her. "Your career is important as it should be. I'm merely suggesting that, perhaps, in time, we might discover if what we're both feeling could grow into something more." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they continued toward the Cartwright farm. But Sophia was acutely aware of the undercurrent that now flowed between them, an acknowledged attraction, and the possibility of a future they might build together. The Cartwright farm came into view as they crested a small hill, a substantial homestead with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive fields stretching toward a creek lined with cottonwood trees. Already, wagons and buggies were gathered in the yard, and lanterns had been hung from poles surrounding an area cleared for dancing. "It looks magical," Sophia said as they approached, admiring the warm glow of the lanterns against the deepening twilight. "Wait until the fiddles start," Lucas replied with a smile. "Then it truly comes alive." Martha Cartwright greeted them enthusiastically as Lucas helped Sophia down from the buggy. "You're just in time. We're setting up the food tables now, and the musicians are tuning up in the barn." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity, as Sophia helped arrange desserts on long trestle tables, while Lucas assisted Mr. Cartwright with hanging additional lanterns. More families arrived, bearing dishes to share and dressed in their finest clothes. Children ran excitedly through the yard, their energy barely contained by parental warnings not to dirty their special attire. As dusk settled fully into evening, the celebration began in earnest. A small band of local musicians, 2 fiddlers, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica struck up a lively tune from the raised platform at one end of the clearing. Lantern light flickered across the faces of the gathering crowd, and the aroma of roast beef, fresh bread, and spiced cider filled the air. "Shall we eat first, or would you prefer to dance?" Lucas asked, appearing at Sophia's side after completing his tasks. "Perhaps some food first," she suggested. "I confess I was too nervous to eat much before we left." "Nervous?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Whatever for?" "This is my first social event in Miles City aside from church," Sophia explained. "I wanted to make a good impression." "You've succeeded admirably," Lucas assured her, his gaze appreciative as it moved over her figure in the blue dress. "Every eye turned when we arrived, and not just because I rarely attend these gatherings." They filled plates with delicious home-cooked food and found seats at one of the tables set up near the edge of the clearing. Several of Sophia's students came by to greet her, their eyes wide at seeing their teacher in evening finery instead of her usual practical school clothes. "You look like a princess, Miss Valenti," 6-year-old Lucy Palmer declared with the honesty of childhood. "Thank you, Lucy," Sophia replied, touched by the compliment. "You look very pretty yourself in that lovely pink dress." As they ate, Lucas pointed out various community members and shared bits of local history. The easy conversation and comfortable atmosphere helped Sophia relax, though she remained acutely aware of Lucas beside her, the warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers, the deep timbre of his voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at something she said. After the meal, the music shifted to a waltz. Lucas stood and extended his hand to Sophia. "May I have this dance, Miss Valenti?" "I would be delighted, Mr. Jackson," she replied, placing her hand in his.